Hello, Billionauts. I'm still reading the Dialectic of Enlightenment. I haven't given up. Only my phone has left us halfway. I'll try to fix that. Meanwhile, you have to put up with this quality of sound and image. I hope that there is such a thing as sound and image right now because I cannot really tell. This is the first time that I record in a computer. But yeah, I'm just gonna take it from where we left it because I know it was quite an abrupt. But if you are here, you are already crazy enough. Not only would you be looked at by 99% of human population as mad because you read, but if you read philosophy, if you read something that sounds like, despite his lack of mathematics, Bacon view was appropriate to the scientific attitude that prevailed after him. If you read something that sounds like that, then you are like mad times 10. So, yeah, for all of you crazy people, here we are with the second part of the concept of enlightenment episode. We left it on. We talked about primitive man. We talked about instrumental reason and instrumental morality. Therefore, treating each other as commodities, trying to extract surplus value from each other. And I think that I'm gonna power and knowledge as synonymous. That's quite interesting. And I think I'm just gonna skip that page. I think I said what I had to say about it. And I'm just gonna go through my highlights of the rest of the chapter, reading aloud and commenting so that you can follow along. We're in page 5 right now. And from there, we have a nice quote here, which is from Bacon. They're using Bacon as Bacon and Luther as sort of like the representatives of the Enlightenment for this chapter. Knowledge that tendeth but to satisfaction is but as a courtesan which is for pleasure and not for fruit or generation. Not satisfaction, which men call truth, but operation, to do the business, is the right mark for what is the true end, scope, or office of knowledge, which I have set down to consist not in any plausible, detectable, reverent, or admired discourse, or any satisfactory arguments, but in effecting and working and in discovery of particulars not revealed before for the better endowment and help of man's life. And now there is to be no mystery. That's sort of like what they extract from this. There is to be no mystery, which means no wish to reveal mystery. The disenchantment, and they follow it from there, the disenchantment of the world is the extirpation of animism. Xenophanes derives the multitude of deities because they are but replicas of the men who reproduce them, together with all that is contingent and evil in mankind. So that's the relationship that enlightenment would have towards mystery. In there no being animism, there is no mystery, but there is also no relationship towards it, which means that there is also no curiosity. There is no necessity to unveil anything that doesn't exist. Mystery is just removed from the picture. The world becomes chaos. Synthesis, salvation. So the world becomes chaos and synthesis, salvation. There is said to be no difference between the totemic animal, the dreams, the ghost seer, and the absolute idea. All of these things are removed as equal. On the road to modern science, men renounce any claim to meaning. They substitute the formula for concept, rule and probability for cause and motive. Cause was only the last philosophic concept which served as a yardstick for scientific criticism, so to speak, because it alone among the old ideas still seemed to offer itself to scientific criticism. The latest secularization is of the creative principle. There you go, pretty self-explanatory. Um, yeah, so that's the way in which sort of like and following from that, and because in a sense that removal of mystery and of the creative principle actually leads to the enlightened transformation of myths or feeding those myths. And here we have a bit more on that. Yeah. The Enlightenment, however, recognized the old powers in the Platonic and Aristotelian aspects of metaphysics, forget about that, and opposed as superstition the claim that truth is predicable of universals. That truth is predicable of universals. So truth with a capital T disappeared. It asserted that in the authority of universal concepts there was still discernible fear of the demonic spirits, which men sought to portray in magic rituals, hoping thus to influence nature. So, any sort of like universal truth, any truth that was systematizable, that was to be defended on a universal basis, was seen as part of that myth that needed to be removed. And in the process, it treats its own ideas of human rights exactly as it does the other universals. Because human rights are universals, morals are universals. Thou shalt not kill is a universal. If you remove universals, you are removing morality. And we will see more of this on the other and the next, not the next chapter, but the one after that. Every spiritual resistance it encounters serves merely to increase its strength, which means that enlightenment still recognizes itself even in myths. Whatever myths the resistance might appeal to, by virtue of the very fact that they become arguments in the process of opposition, they acknowledge the principle of dissolvement rationality for which they reproach the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, in other words, is totalitarian. It's hard to read my my handwriting. Yeah, so it sees the myth as and the mythic figures as anthropomorphic and therefore biased as well. Um, all to be and everything. No, at the end, it brings them to the anthropomorphic, the other way around. They are all to be seen as subjected to the human subject, basically. Bourgeois society is ruled by equivalence. That again has to do with the systematization. You need to compartmentalize and equal and symmetric wholes. To the Enlightenment, that which does not reduce to numbers and ultimately to the one becomes illusion. Modern positivism writes it off as literature. This is also a defense of philosophy. In some ways, the ascent of science, which used to be a brand of philosophy, as separate from it, meant marginalization of philosophy as mere anthropomorphism, or in this case as literature, as part of those myths. And Adorno and Horkheimer are trying to defend that as well. I think it becomes evident on the next pages. We are now in page 8. Narrative became didactic at an early stage. Every ritual includes the idea of activity as a determined process with which magic can nevertheless influence. Myth eventually turns into enlightenment again, and edge into mere objectivity. Because any spirit that is systematic, anything that wants to sort of like apply to an unending whole, is equal to the idea of God. And for that, classification is required. In that classification, we are also like reduced to to quantifiable values, and so is nature. Disqualified nature becomes the chaotic matter of mere classification, and the all-powerful self becomes mere possession, abstract identity. All-powerful self, because the enlightenment at the end of the day is the inner migration of this of the sort of like the motion of history towards itself. Like the self gains value and protagonism in this movement. I'm just gonna jump forward a little bit in the sense that no specific representation, universal mythology itself sets off an ending process of the mythology itself then sets off the ending process of the enlightenment. This is what I was talking about before, about like in the previous video. I mean, that in the efforts of animism to mimic nature, there was already the seed of the enlightenment, the seed of wanting to understand that nature. Mythology itself set off the unending process of enlightenment, in which ever and again, with the inevitability of necessity, every specific theoretic view succumbs to the destructive criticism that it is only a belief, until even the very notion of spirit, of truth, and indeed enlightenment itself have become animistic magic. Okay, just checking the battery because I don't know what's going on with batteries, but everything seems to be dying on me. The principle of immanence in the next page, the explanations of every event as repetition that the Enlightenment upholds against mythic imagination is the principle of myth itself. So again, and that is also the principle of the Enlightenment. They are all trying to link Enlightenment with myth and showing how they did not destroy myth, because that's the myth of Enlightenment, is that they could, but they couldn't, but replaced it with a very destructive and very dangerous form of myth that does not allow for the more constructive myths to be in place, such as the myth of morality. The natural is put in context with the individual. It fixes the transcendence of the unknown in relation to the known, and therefore terror is seen as sacred. The dualization of nature as appearance and sequence, effort and power, which first makes possible both myth and science, originates in human fear, the expression of which becomes explanation. So the explanations provided by science are another expression of the human fear that is trying to be overcome through the understanding of nature. I feel the thunder, I'm afraid, I explain it, and through that explanation I take control over that fear that I felt, of that thing that felt supernatural. But this dialectic remains impotent to the extent that it develops from the cry of terror. And this is very important, which is the duplication, the tautology of terror itself, the tautology of terror itself. A fallacy, basically. The gods cannot take fear away from man, for they bear its petrified sound with them as they bear their names. Man imagines himself free from fear when there is no longer anything unknown. Again, this is sort of like what I was explaining just a minute ago, and but then from that another thing follows, which is that determines the course of the demythologization. That determines the course of demythologization of English. Of enlightenment. That's why I like Latin. Of enlightenment, which compounds the animate with the inanimate, just as myth compounds the inanimate with the animate. Enlightenment is mythic fear turned radical. Now, why radical? Radical because it tries to extract from the root by extending the realm of reason to every aspect of reality. So reason wants to be sort of like expanded, systematic, instrumental reason wants to be expanded to every single aspect of reality, allowing for no other expression of the human spirit. The step from chaos to civilization, in which natural conditions exert their power no longer directly but through the medium of the human consciousness, has not changed the principle of equivalence. Faith is a privative concept. It is destroyed as faith if it does not continually display its contradiction to or conformity with knowledge. Yeah, so faith is still possible within the Enlightenment. The premise of the Enlightenment at the end of the day is an expression of faith. Truth is necessary for belief, which is basically page number 20. The thesis of this page is truth is necessary for belief. Unnecessary for belief. Language itself gave what was asserted the conditions of domination, the universality that they had assumed as the means of intercourse of a bourgeois society. Again, here we are talking more about human relations. The individual domination appears to be the universal reason in actuality. The magical substance permeates everything. This is page 23. The disenchanted world of Judaism conciliates magic by negating it in the idea of God. So God in some ways is, I know God in some ways is a myth, is a superstition, but it's also a shield from other forms of superstition that Judaism sort of like sought. In the impartiality of scientific language, that which is powerless has wholly lost any means of expression and only finds its neutral sign. This kind of neutrality is more metaphysical than metaphysics, which is to say, not scientific. Then they have a nice passage here on infinity. I'm going to skip it, but if you want to have a look at the infinite world, it's just like linking infinity and mathematics in page 25, but that would take too long to talk about. The mastery of nature draws the circle into which the criticism of pure reason banishes thought. His judgment is an oracle. There is no form of being in the world that science could not penetrate, or be penetrated by science, deposited in the object. This is more mathematics. I don't want to talk about mathematics. Human significance, yeah. Okay, actually, well, doesn't matter. Sorry, I'm trying to just get the main arguments out there so that we can have a line, sort of like a full overlapping argument, because there's so much more going on here than I can touch into in a single video. And I'm not trying to make a series of lectures or anything like that. This is a read-along with a bit of read-aloud characteristics in it. Now, the world as a gigantic analytic judgment, the only one left over from all the dreams of science, is the same mold as the cosmic myth which associated the cycle of spring and autumn with the kidnapping of Persephone. They are starting to associate certain concepts with mythos here, because the next chapter is going to be all on the Odyssey. And more on that at the end of this video. Originally, the carrying off of the goddess was directly synonymous with the dying of nature. I'm not going to get into mythical readings. We'll do that on the next video. Through the establishments, here they talk a little bit about the idea of eternal return or repetition. The mythic terror feared by the Enlightenment accords with the myth. Enlightenment discerns it not merely in unclarified concepts and words, as demonstrated by semantic language criticism, but in any human assertion that has no place in the ultimate context of self-preservation. More self-preservation as the destruction of nature, more naturalness and the enlightened spirit. In page 31, and let's just get this last quote to end this couple of pages. Where was it? Here we go. Okay, yeah. So, the fear of uncomprehended threatening nature, the consequence of its very materialization of objectification, was reduced to animistic superstition. The subjugation of nature was made the absolute purpose of life, within and without. Men have always had to choose between the subjection to nature or the subjection of nature to the self. That's the main thesis of this chapter for me, the most interesting one. Now it follows a long reflection on the Odyssey, and meets just a specific part of the Odyssey where Homer is blinds himself or something like that, and removes his seamen's ears so that they can survive the sirens. I'm skipping that because I haven't read the Odyssey. I've read part of the Iliad last summer, not this one, the one before, and I was defeated by by the conditions in which I chose to do that. But I am basically gonna have to read the Iliad, not the Iliad, sorry, the Odyssey before continuing with this read along, because the next chapter is all on the Odyssey. So there might be a pause of a couple of days in which I'm just reading the Odyssey, and I'll try to do that very fast. Because anyways, it's a book that I'm gonna have to reread many times, and I feel like the reason why I've been prolonging it is precisely because I always felt like if I read the Odyssey, I have to study the Odyssey. So I'm just gonna get over with that, remove all that bullshit, and just read the Odyssey, which won't take too long, because generally reading takes me a long time because I take a lot of notes and write reflections and have separate documents in which I write. But if I'm just reading, it's not gonna take a long time. So don't worry, there won't be a big delay between this and the next chapter. But there will be a comment on the Odyssey, some video about the Odyssey before reading the next chapter. But continuing here with the arguments after that, primitive man experienced the natural thing merely as the evasive object of desire. This is a little bit about the pleasure. I don't know I think Freud hadn't written, was not yet known when this book came out, or maybe they were contemporaries. But this to me reminds me a lot of the pleasure principle from Freud. So like all human drives are driven by a struggle towards pleasure. No, don't agree, but very convincing. And yeah, just to finish this quote, which is pretty much, you could summarize this whole book in this one quote: "The course of irresistible progress is irresistible regression." You've probably heard me say that before, and there's a reason for that. There's a lot more here. There's talking like about nature and nurture, about bureaucracy, about machine, sort of like how the machinery that we build takes over and controls human structures, and how truth is neutralized through culture once culture becomes a commodity, which is a preview of the culture industry episode chapter, and the talk on mythical terror, in which primitive man comes back, which we talked about at the beginning. Remember the idea of instrumental reason as being sort of like Frankenstein monster running away and taking control, not only of itself, but because in this case, instrumental reason is the space in which we share our lives and organize our societies, taking control of us. So that's both the seed of progress and of the regression that came afterwards. That is the concept of enlightenment. The next chapter will be Odysseus, or the myth and the enlightenment. And for that chapter, I will make sure that first I have read the book of the Odyssey. For those who claim that philosophy is somehow isolated from other disciplines or other forms of writing, that the problem with philosophy is that if you read philosophy, you kind of like people falls into the niche of only reading philosophy. You can recognize those kind of people because they look like they never got laid. In reality, philosophy is very much like fire. It requires of some fuel in order to work. and that's why this book is in conversation with anthropology, with the arts, with paintings, with the Odyssey. And you reading this book brings you to books that are not philosophy. This is not isolated within philosophy. It speaks to other disciplines. In this case, it's speaking to the classical world, and therefore I'm heading that way for the next couple of days. I'm just gonna be reading that, and I'll get back to you on both the Odyssey and the Dialectic of Enlightenment once I'm done with that. And till then, take care of yourself, and I'll see you on the other side.